essentially the debt of NB Power is not unreasonable. It's normal for a utility in the electricity sector to have such a debt. And as we know, the Auditor General have said that this debt does not influence the debt of the province of New Brunswick. The credit rating of the province of New Brunswick has not changed, would not change with this sale of NB Power, etc., etc. Another way to look at it is the debt per capita of the provinces. Essentially, if I go down to the numbers, the provincial debt per capita of New Brunswick is about $10,000. The debt for every citizen of Quebec in Quebec is about $17,000. So in terms of provincial debt as a percentage of GDP, we're about a quarter of our GDP. The debt of Quebec is over 40%, almost 50% of GDP. Essentially, Quebec is in much worse fiscal situation as we are, and the debt of NB Power is not different than the debt of Hydro-Quebec. So all this notion of debt is irrelevant in all of this debate here. So what was the deal then? Essentially, we had the messages from the government of lower rates, much lower rates, industrial rates, better industrial rates, and pay down of the debt. So what I say here is the real story, and I underline here from the MOU. Because it's from the MOU that we could do independent and objective analysis of this deal to see if it was a deal that was interesting or not for New Brunswickers. And so essentially, I summarize, and I'll try not to pass too much time on deal 1 because it's of the past, but it helps us understand the second deal. So essentially, Hydro-Quebec was acquiring what I call the interesting assets of NB Power. Transmission, distributions, 400,000 clients, 6,800 kilometers of transmission lines, the non-polluting generation asset, and we were keeping the fossil fuel plants, essentially. But we were also, Hydro-Quebec was also acquiring Pointe-de-Pro, but only after Pointe-de-Pro would have been fully operational. Essentially, Pointe-de-Pro re-refurbishment project being finished, Pointe-de-Pro generating electricity in an amount that is expected from it, and obtaining all the permits and authorization to operate a nuclear plant. So essentially, the day that Pointe-de-Pro would make money, it would be transferred to Hydro-Quebec. That was in deal 1, still the case in deal 2. And there would be 2 payments, one the first payment and the second payment for Pointe-de-Pro, and I'll get back to that in deal 2. And there was also a line in the MOU that says that the financial assets accumulated to cover the used fuel disposal and the decommissioning of Pointe-de-Pro, $450 million would follow this deal, so would go to Hydro-Quebec. I'll come back to that a little bit later. Essentially, great advantage for Hydro-Quebec. Then we retained the facilities. Some facilities that we were retaining, Beldoon and Coulson Cove. And essentially, we would operate Beldoon and Coulson Cove at the direction and for the benefit of Hydro-Quebec on a cost recovery basis. We will not make money out of operating those 2 plants. They would decide, Hydro-Quebec would decide when we would need to shut down Beldoon and Coulson Cove at any time with a 1-year prior notice. And we would retain all liabilities in terms of decommissioning of those fossil fuel plants. All CO2 emissions that would related to Beldoon and Coulson Cove would accrue to the benefit of Hydro-Quebec, including allowances if they were sold rather than used. Essentially, if we close down those plants and there's some carbon credits coming down with the closing of those plants, all the benefits would go to Hydro-Quebec. Then there's the surplus facilities, Courtney Bay, Dalhousie, and Grand Lake, and essentially we would retain and decommission those plants on a schedule essentially dictated by Hydro-Quebec, and this would be now. If you close them down, then now. Then the rates. For the large customers, for the first 5 years, there's 41 clients, and this was published by the government of New Brunswick. 41 customers would have rates that would follow the rate of Quebec. I forgot the line, sorry, there's a line missing here. No, it's there. So follow the same rate. It would be tied to the rates on the first year. So this is the line missing. And it would follow the same rate increase as in Quebec for the industrial rates. Undeniably, this is the main advantage of this deal of selling NB Power. All excess, this notion of heritage pool supply, I won't go into detail, but essentially all consumption beyond a fixed amount of power that was agreed, all the cost for this excess supply would be adjusted, the rates would be adjusted to reflect the cost of providing that power. Then for the customers, there was a rate freeze, and that was one of the main messages of the government. The main message was lower rates, but then we realized it was a rate freeze, so therefore not lower rates for 5 years. But then there was some cost, the cost beyond the heritage pool that will be paid in the 6th year, plus interest accumulated over the first 5 years, plus another whole series of costs that I will get into in a few lines from now. So the rates after 5 years would be the rates for the heritage pool supply minus the transmission and distribution costs would escalate at CPI. And again, that was the main message of the government. The rates after 5 years would escalate at the consumer price index. But there's much more than that. So transmission distribution was not part of that, and transmission and distribution would be regulated by the EUB, which is now on a cost recovery basis. But with Hydro-Québec, there would be a profit added to that, to the owner of the transmission and distribution system. So a sense of maybe if they wanted, maybe they had some plans to sell some of those. That's why I think the word owner was in that MOU. And essentially, all electricity beyond the heritage pool supply would be supplied by a market-based competitive approach, but the additional cost would be in the rate structure. The transmission cost, distribution cost, plus profit to the owner would be factored in the rate structure. All the decommissioning of the surplus facilities, all the Beldoon, Coulson Cove, Courtney Bay, Dalhousie, surplus facilities, Courtney Bay, Dalhousie, and Grand Lake, and all the decommissioning of the retained facilities, Beldoon and Coulson Cove, would be factored in the rates after 5 years. All the costs that would come through a regulatory process here in New Brunswick, there's a law of something that would incur costs, would be factored in the rates after the 5 years. There's a deferral account at Point of Road that would be factored beyond $525 million, that would be factored in the rates. Then the list continues, the replacement or improvement of the cost of the Eel River and Madawaska connection and transmission lines. The question was, is it needed to better serve New Brunswick, or is this needed to better access the American market through New Brunswick? But whatever the case, we would pay for that upgrade. All costs of dismantling and making good of Mactaquac if permits to rebuild is denied, or if conditions are not acceptable to Hydro-Québec. So we hear Mactaquac often, there's a big cost for Mactaquac. Well, if Mactaquac goes forward, it's because Hydro-Québec will make money out of it. If the refurbishment of Mactaquac does not go forward, it comes back to us and would be factored in the rates. Any costs at Point of Road beyond the cost of compliance with federal requirements, all the costs related to the open access transmission network, all the market competition for the provision of electricity in excess of the heritage pool supply, all the costs related to the facilitation of the energy hub concept, and any supplemental costs related to renewable energy. Message of the government was rate freeze. First 5 years was cost some deferred to the 6th year. After the 6th year, the message of the government was escalation at CPI. The MOU gave us a whole list of other costs that would be factored in the rates starting in the 6th year. Then we also learned that the system operator, which manages the transmission system, would be merged into Hydro-Québec. All the functions, all the assets, buildings, trucks, transmission line, etc., and employees would be assumed by Hydro-Québec. Then all the regulatory framework of the transmission and distribution in New Brunswick of the energy sector would be changed to be the same, to conform to the framework currently in Quebec. We still make the law on the energy sector, but we have no choice. It has to match Quebec energy sector. Then we learned also that Hydro-Québec would have a Crown Corporation status with all the rights and privilege that this brings to it. Essentially, not subject to income tax, not subject to capital tax, not payments in lieu to the government in lieu of tax, etc., etc. In summary, the message of the government of New Brunswick and the summary provided by the government of New Brunswick for the deal one was not equal to the details that we found in MOU 1. It's MOU 1 that allowed us to make an independent and objective analysis of the deal to see if it was good or not for New Brunswick. And analyzing MOU 1 as a one-liner, we saw that Deal 1 had an important bias in favor of Hydro-Québec. We were giving way too much to Hydro-Québec for what we were getting in this deal once we analyzed the MOU 1.